This is American Family Radio, a listener-supported ministry of the American Family Association.
American Family News, I'm Steve Pugh. The U.S. military launches what it calls defensive strikes against Iranian air defenses and drone sites. Alex Hogan has the latest.
U.S. Central Command made this announcement just hours ago, saying American forces carried out strikes this weekend, bombing Iranian radar and drone control sites in Gorak, Iran, and Qasem Island. And according to Central Command, the measured and deliberate strikes occurred on Saturday and Sunday in response to aggressive Iranian actions that included the shoot-down of a U.S. MQ-1 drone that was operating over international waters. U.S. fighter aircraft swiftly responded by eliminating Iranian air defenses, a ground control station, and 2 one-way attack drones.
President Trump said over the weekend that Iran still wants to make a deal. But Tennessee Senator Bill Hagerty says there's still the question of who's in charge in Iran.
The regime is fairly discombobulated, as you know. That's why it's taken so long to negotiate anything. But President Trump has been clear. He wants this decision to be made by the Iranian people in terms of who will lead that country. I think we need to have an opportunity to see if we can get to a deal. And hopefully what we see is a resurrection of a country that has great economic potential.
As long as the war continues, Americans continue to see gas prices going up. National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett on the chain of events that will more quickly lead to lower oil and gas prices.
When you leave the Straits, then you can get to Pakistan almost right away. You can get to India almost right away. You can get to Korea, Singapore a little bit faster. But the point is, those are the places where the refineries had to shut down because they didn't have oil. And that's why diesel prices went through the roof and jet fuel prices went through the roof. And what happened with U.S. refineries is when they saw how much money they could make with diesel and with jet fuel, then they changed what they refine and refined less gasoline and more of the other stuff, which was so costly. As soon as the oil lands in Asia, then we expect those prices to reverse and gasoline production in the U.S. to go up.
Former First Lady Jill Biden continues to defend the pardon for Hunter Biden by her husband, Joe Biden.
Joe said in the beginning, I won't pardon Hunter, I won't pardon Hunter. But then when Trump was elected, things changed. And we knew that he would target Hunter. And we just could not let our son go to jail on a charge that no one would go, no one has ever gone to jail for.
But criminal defense attorney and Fox News contributor Ken Bilkin says that's absolutely not true.
Jill Biden totally lacks credibility at this point. I said 2 years ago that Joe Biden was going to pardon his son. The reality is there's very few things that Hunter Biden has done that people don't go to jail for. And I just want to remind you, she's out there promoting her book. She made this comment about Joe Biden and Trump's debate. Then she said, I was so scared that Joe Biden was having a stroke. Well, you say that now while you're promoting a book. But the night of the debate, you said, you did a great job, Joe. You knew all the facts. I think it's pretty clear. He didn't even know what room he was in.
And finally, a former Iowa school superintendent who was in the country illegally has been sentenced to 2 years in prison.
Ian Andre Roberts was arrested in September of 2025. He likely faces deportation after the sentence is completed. Upon announcing his arrest, ICE described Roberts as a criminal illegal alien from Guyana who was found in possession of a loaded handgun, $3,000 in cash, and a fixed-blade hunting knife. At the time of his arrest, Roberts was working as the superintendent of Des Moines Public Schools. Jeff Stein is an attorney and radio host in Iowa. He said the prosecution asked for 3 years, while the defense wanted straight probation.
This is the judge sort of evaluating independently, recognizing that to simply let him leave and be taken back to Guyana to be deported without any prison time would send a very bad signal. I have a feeling that the prosecution asked for 3 years, figuring it might be something less. Given the totality of the circumstances, he had to do some prison time. You're not only talking about deception and fraud with regard to his academic credentials, but all of the weapons violations. Anyone else with similar charges would have wound up with prison time. It's a very consistent sentence for the jurisdiction.
I'm Chris Woodward.
For American Family News, I'm Steve Pugh.
Every day, AFA offers biblical insight on issues that others aren't willing to touch in the hopes that you'll become a world changer. That's why we're offering an in-depth worldview training course called Activate. 13 different professors teaching 18 sessions, all available online, including a printed workbook to help you apply what you've learned, and 1-year access to AFA streaming content to give you even more resources. Find out more about Activate and sign up today at activate.afa.net.
Jenna Ellis in the morning on American Family Radio.
I love talking about the things of God because of truth and the biblical worldview. The U.S. Constitution obligates our government to preserve and protect the rights that our founders recognize come from God, our Creator, not our government. I believe that Scripture in the Bible is very clear that God is the one that raised up each of you, and God has allowed us to be brought here to this specific moment in time.
This is Jenna Ellis in the morning.
Good morning. It is Monday, June 1st. Happy June, and we are fully into summer here in the free state of Florida with a lot of humidity. Looking forward to the rainy season, and I just love Florida after it rains. It's so beautiful. But happy June, and we are barreling onward toward November with a lot of questions and concerns, quite frankly, over the midterms. And there's been a lot of emphasis on a couple of specific races. And one that we really do need to talk about is now the Texas Senate race that has been set up with Ken Paxton's win as the nominee of the Republicans, and then James Talarico, who is the Democrat nominee. I mean, this should not even be close. This should be a complete and total blowout for Ken Paxton. And I know that there are some commentators on X talking about, well, what about his personal scandals and what about, some of those things? Well, my opinion on that, and we have Donald Trump as president, so anybody who voted for him implicitly agrees with this, that personal life absolutely matters, but policy matters even more. I mean, what you do and what a candidate will do in elected office actually matters in terms of moving forward with the conservative agenda. Now, you don't have to agree with everything in a candidate's personal life, and I think that we should strive to have character matter more than it has over the last 10 years of the Trump era. But it doesn't necessarily predict the ultimate policy goals or the votes that a person will have in elected office, such as the Senate. And so what actually matters most is the worldview overall. And let's be fair to Ken Paxton. A lot of what is alleged as personal scandal is just a lot of the leftist Democrats going after him, like the faux impeachment that he handily won. I mean, a lot of that nonsense is just to try to diminish his credibility as a candidate. But there are some obvious personal issues as well that no Christian should agree with. But even when I was representing Trump, I would always say that, there are things in his personal life absolutely I disagree with. But I'm not, sorry, my voice today, I'm kind of getting over being sick. But there are things in his personal life in his past that obviously we as Christians don't agree with. But that doesn't mean that we can't agree with his policy, and that obviously Donald Trump was a better candidate than, say, Kamala Harris, right, or Hillary Clinton, which is how we got into this whole Trump era to begin with. So setting this up between Ken Paxton and James Talarico, Talarico's worldview has been put on full display, and it is incredible to me that the Democrats actually think in 2026 that their woke progressive agenda that totally failed with Beto O'Rourke, remember him from Texas, is going to somehow rise again in the form of James Talarico, who professes to be a Christian, but clearly spouts not just nonsense, but total heresy. And so before we bring on our special guest this morning, I want to play this super cut that was posted on X by an account that goes by Real Spitfire. I don't know if this is her personal clip or where it's actually from, but it was so good, just displaying some of the things over just the last couple of years that Talarico has said that he actually believes. And this is where the divide between the parties becomes so stark. This is cut one.
Did they teach you in Sunday school that Jesus Christ himself was a radical feminist. The American flag is such a complicated symbol for most of us. God is non-binary.
You can't call yourself a Christian and reject the stranger seeking asylum at our southern border.
Our trans community needs abortion care too. Modern science obviously recognizes that there are many more than 2 biological sexes. In fact, there are 6. Prophetic voices like Jesus have helped me reckon with my own whiteness. Our southern border should be like our front porch. There should be a giant welcome mat out front.
We are trying to fundamentally change the politics in this state and in this country.
Yep. No need to sit and cry over, your whiteness or your masculinity.
Wow. A lot to unpack there. So let's welcome in Orrin McIntyre, who is a host at The Blaze and prolific writer. You can follow him on X at Orrin McIntyre. And, this just seems to be so obvious that not only is James Talarico not competent at all to be a senator from Texas, but his worldview on Christianity is something that isn't just in his personal life, clearly, but he will carry forward into his politics and policies by suggesting that there are 6 genders. I'd love for him to say what the other 4 genders actually are, like Brandon Gill is asking for, and that obviously goes into his perspective on the border, on immigration reform. I mean, all of this, the base worldview is so anti-Christian, it's so anti-legitimate government, Orrin.
Yeah, I think as we've all seen from the Biden era and many others, simply calling yourself a Christian or a faithful Catholic in the case of Joe Biden doesn't mean anything if it's not reflected in any way, shape, or form in your actual views. I think Christians are becoming more and more aware that simply assenting to the religion with your mouth, but then having none of it show up in the way you actually want the world to look, the way you actually live your life and the views you profess, is simply not enough. It doesn't cover over the actual issue. Talarico can say or couch all of these horrific positions in some kind of twisted version of Christianity, but that doesn't mean they should be taken any more seriously. Obviously, if you're talking about when someone asks you, what do you love? What's something you love that's not your family or your dog or something? And the first thing that pops in his brain is trans kids. I mean, that says something very deep about who this person is. And as you say, Paxton might have any given foible in his personal life, and that's not excused here, but reflected in what has happened, with Talarico, there's obviously really no choice here. You can't support somebody who's out there pushing for the mutilation of children because he thinks that's some twisted version of God's love.
Yeah, 100%. And, and again, to me, the main issue is how are you going to translate your worldview into your policy? And it's very clear from what Talarico has said over the past number of years exactly where he would be in representing Texas in the Senate. And to Ken Paxton's credit, it's been very clear where he stands on not just Trump's agenda, but overall policy that has not been good just for the state of Texas. And he's done a phenomenal job as Texas Attorney General. I mean, I thought he would have made a great U.S. Attorney General. But he's going to carry that forward into the Senate in a way that will actually be helpful. And I think we need some fighters in the Senate that we've seen maybe on the House side, but we really haven't seen in the Senate. And I think that's an interesting phenomenon because we have a couple of people, like Rand Paul, but he's a little more, kind of the island unto himself. But we don't really have those kind of firebrand conservatives that are in the Senate, and I see Paxton going in being one of those.
Yeah, the Senate is meant to be a little more insulated from trends, the longer times and the statewide election, the longer incumbencies. Those are meant to kind of smooth things out in a way that the House, doesn't have. And so much of the populist energy that has worked its way through the presidency and the House has still not made its way entirely to the Senate. And so Paxton might be kind of the first wave of a kind of post-Trump senator. Not that people haven't been elected to the Senate after Trump obviously has been elected, but those political trends are take a little longer to impact the greater House, and so I think that could be an interesting trend we could see over the years, and that of course has us asking larger questions of once Trump is gone, will he still have an influence? Will his style, his approach, this kind of shift in mentality of the GOP, will it be maintained after he has gone, or will we see things kind of move back to more of a status quo? I think that's a lot of what the positioning is kind of behind the scenes as we look at the Republican Party and different elections. So the fact that someone like Ken Paxton represents that shift moving to the Senate is an interesting development.
Yeah, and I really hope that we don't have a continuation of what has become a godless populism and sort of the cult of personality, or however you'd like to describe what the MAGA movement has become, but also not obviously going back to kind of the stick in the mud, do nothing, rhino establishment that as long as we're a little bit better than the Democrats, then you got to vote for us, because that's some of the criticism that I've seen of Paxton's candidacy online, which I understand that people are saying, well, we're tired of voting for the lesser of two evils all the time. But I actually don't see Ken Paxton being a lesser of two evils. I mean, again, I get some of the personal issues, but I'm very excited to see somebody like him actually go into the Senate because he's a fighter, because of his policy, because of all of the things that he stands for in terms of his public office. So I actually really don't think it's a lesser of two evils. But I think that there is a lot of that sentiment. And so moving forward, when we see that the Democrats actually think that in Texas, James Talarico is the candidate that they want to put up, what does that say to you about the future of the Democrat Party and looking at potentially renominating Kamala Harris for president? It's like they didn't learn anything, even though they released the 2024 presidential autopsy.
It is a very interesting dynamic. So, of course, Talarico beat Jasmine Crockett, which a lot of people at first assumed was some kind of signal that the left was trying to put the woke away. You kind of had the most ridiculous DEI, candidate who kind of gets rejected, the most flagrant, probably kind of example of that anyone could think of. But then you bring in Talarico, and you think, okay, well, I guess the Democrats decided that running a white guy was okay again. We're allowed to try to have, a white male candidate, even though that's something that they had been very adverse to across the board. But then you look at who Talarico is, and in many ways he is, despite not, fitting the demographic bill of the left, even more ideologically radical than Crockett was, or at least radical in a different way. And you see that there really hasn't been a purging of the wokeness in any way, that they think that someone like Talarico can still make it through with what has to be almost all of the least popular positions in the Democratic platform. And so a lot of people assume that there would be some attempt to adjust away from this ideology and go back to maybe more Bernie Sanders economic populism, or something that's going to not trigger the issues that people have with kind of trans issues in women's sports and everything else, but still, hit on some of the stuff that Trump might be weak on due to the current economic situation. And instead, it's very clear that the left is not capable of this. Even when they make course corrections inside the party, they are not purging away this ideology. Now, Kamala Harris is interesting because, beyond the ideology, Harris was just a charisma void and just not very smart at all. Like when she had these interviews, she just came off sounding like an idiot. So yeah, her sentences were woke, but that wasn't even the worst part of them. The worst part of them is that she just sounded very unlikable and very unintelligent when she was speaking. And so I don't quite understand, other than just name recognition, what anyone would see in Kamala Harris returning back to this. But it's very clear that the left has not seen her positions as a problem. And so there won't be any correction there. Maybe they'll find someone slightly more charismatic or competent to repeat them, but I don't think we'll be getting any kind of difference in kind, just degree.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think the Democrats overall, it's not just that they haven't learned their lesson because like there's a lot of online chatter saying that. I don't think the Democrats at any point have actually wanted to cater to their voters or actually represent their constituents or anything else other than just remain in power and do what they want to do. And so, they've never cared what anyone thinks about them. They've never actually cared about appealing to voters or having that same sort of actual statesman kind of mentality that hopefully some Republicans at least maintain. But it begs the question about Texas, and I don't think that the race is actually as close between Paxton and Talarico as the polls suggest. I think a lot of them are kind of scare tactic polls. I mean, almost like what happened between Trump and Kamala Harris. I mean, right up to Election Day, we were all told this is a nail biter. This is going to be so close, and it's anybody's game. And it was a total blowout for Trump. And I think the same thing is going to happen with Ken Paxton, hopefully, because I just don't think that there are that many people in Texas who are that leftist who are willing to say, yeah, James Talarico is who we think we want to send to the Senate.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say that I know the dynamics of Texas extremely well, but from what I've observed, with Paxton getting the kind of win that he got in that primary blowout by, 30-plus points, clearly he has the support and enthusiasm of the base if he's getting that much of a landslide against an incumbent, Trump or not. Paxton had to be a big part of that. And so that will most assuredly, turn into a decent turnout for his candidacy. And then I don't know how motivated the left would be by a candidate like Talarico, and if there are enough people who would even consider, in the middle, kind of crossing over and voting for him, given his positions being so deeply unpopular. Again, he believes pretty much everything that got the Democrats punished last cycle. The only way I could really see, that race going against Paxton is if there is such a general backlash against Republicans in the midterms that just kind of down ticket bleeds over into that race. But I still don't think it's going to be sufficient to make that happen.
Yeah, and my producer, Luke, who, of course, is listening, just texted me and said Biden was up by 2 and 5 in Politico and then another poll in 2020 in Texas. They do this every time, and he lives in Texas. He's very aware of the dynamics there. And I agree with him that the left does this every time. And I think that they even do that with the races that they prefer. Like, obviously, they preferred Cornyn to Paxton. They want Trump to lose every time. And so they artificially inflate polls just to hopefully suppress the vote or get, some kind of alternative turnout. And they're trying to make the polls be prophetic and then ultimately influence the outcome, which is why I personally, I don't like paying attention to any of the polls. I mean, obviously we have to talk about it, and that's part of, the overall dynamic. But I think Luke is absolutely right that they do this every time just to make it seem like it's a bigger race. And obviously then that makes the Republicans have to pour in more money into these races. And it's really incredible how much money, was spent on Massey's race. And that was all just about Trump. But moving forward to November, in just the last couple minutes we have with you, Orrin, I think it's interesting to see how, this midterm is going to be a reckoning, I think, on the Trump agenda and whether the base is satisfied enough with what has gone on, not just from Trump himself, but overall in Congress, to say, listen, we want to give you another 2 years with the trifecta to hopefully have more conservatives in there that are willing to get things done, like the Save America Act. And I hope that that continues. Otherwise, we're just going to have 2 years of, fake, crazy impeachments and all kinds of nonsense.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's rather critical that the GOP lock this down because, as you say, otherwise the left is not going to let them get anything done, which, wouldn't look a whole lot different for the Republican Congress, but would hamstring the president and make the rest of his presidency very likely a lame duck session. It would be very difficult, again, to avoid the constant investigations, impeachment, all the other roadblocks that the left would have access to if they end up wrestling away one of the chambers. That said, it's going to be uphill climb. I mean, this was always, just the rhythms of politics, trying to keep the both of the chambers while you are incumbent is very difficult. It's very rare that anybody is able to keep the trifecta that long, and it's not like the Republicans had made an amazing case to motivate their voters in the first place. And on top of that, obviously, you have some difficulty. I think Trump still has support of the majority of his base, but ultimately has lost a little bit of that mid-ground. And so it's going to be very difficult as they attempt to kind of secure that a second time.
Yeah, so well said. And it's so fascinating. I mean, we're going to continue to talk about all of this as we head into November and a number of other races as well across the country. I mean, obviously, this is the biggest one last week and moving into this week. But Orrin McIntyre, really appreciate your comments as always. And again, you can follow him on X at Orrin McIntyre. We will be right back with more.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tim Wildman, president of American Family Association and American Family Radio. Hey, we are announcing 2 tours coming up in 2027, March of 2027. We're going to Greece and we're going to Italy. The Greece tour we call the Footsteps of Paul, and you're going to follow the footsteps of St. Paul in the country of Greece. And then the Italian tour, the Tour of Italy, Venice, Florence, Pisa, Rome. We're calling the Make Lasagna Great Again tour. And these are coming up in March of 2027. And if you want to read all about them, the itinerary, the cost, everything you need to know about these tours coming up in March of Greece and Italy, go to tours.afa.net. That's tours.afa.net. We're going to have a lot of fun, a lot of good fellowship, and see some of the most historic and iconic sites in the world.
This is Bible League International. Not far from the conflict in the Middle East right now, Mahmoud was an Islamic cleric. He accepted the invitation of a Christian friend to attend a Bible study.
I was born and brought up in a Muslim family. I started reading the Bible not to know the Word of God, but to find out the faults.
The Holy Spirit would convince Mahmoud he was a sinner and there was no other name under heaven by which to be saved except that of Jesus. He was labeled an infidel, kicked out of his village, his family's left him. He's never seen them since. But today he's a pastor and a church planter. He's planted 15 churches ranging from 13 to 30 people, and he's praying for Bibles there in the Middle East. AFR and Bible League are teamed up to bless 16,000 Bibleless believers around the world, and that includes those persecuted for their faith. We've seen 8,000 sent. We've got 8,000 to go by June 30th, so at $5 a Bible, $100 sends 20, $500 sends 100. Would you call 800-YES-WORD? 800-YES-WORD. That's 800-YES-WORD, or give it sendbiblesnow.org, sendbiblesnow.org.
Hello, Americans. I'm Todd Starnes. Stand by for news and commentary next. A former editor for Vogue, the fashion magazine, says she got triggered because she was the only black person in the first-class cabin of a jetliner bound for Milan. Gabriella Johnson posted a screed on social media explaining that she found herself surrounded by 5 middle-aged white guys, and she was the lone black woman. She surmised that because she is black, she would be subjected to substandard service because the flight attendant was a man. Miss Johnson wailed that she suffered microaggressions from the moment she sat down, so she demanded the airline downgrade her to a business class ticket. She said that she would gladly sacrifice physical comfort to protect her emotional and mental well-being. Ms. Johnson did not reveal the name of the airline. She also failed to disclose the nature of the microaggression that set her off. Maybe the flight attendant forgot to give her one of those hot hand towels. I'm Todd Starnes.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back. Well, according to Brendan Carr over at the FCC, Disney, the Disney company, has filed a petition with the FCC asking the agency to declare that The View, that show, Whoopi Goldberg, Joy Behar, all of those people that are just totally nonsensical with their opinions, Disney has actually filed a petition asking the FCC to declare that The View is exempt from the statutory equal opportunities requirements that would otherwise apply to broadcast shows. So Disney is actually arguing that The View qualifies as quote-unquote bona fide news under the law, comparing itself to Meet the Press or Face the Nation. So that begs the question, what does Disney actually think about Meet the Press and Face the Nation? Maybe they're, a clown show like The View is, but Disney is arguing that, and if they want this qualification, because then The View can have one partisan candidate for office on The View while denying equal opportunities to all the others. So the FCC is currently seeking public comment on Disney's request to be labeled bona fide news. So that's what we're doing right now. By the way, this is my public comment is ha 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 ha. Absolutely not. But the question is The View a bona fide news program? Well, let's welcome in Mike Donnelly, who is an attorney and also probably laughing along with me. But the question, first and foremost, is what actually qualifies as a bona fide news interview program compared to something else?
Good morning, Jenna. Great to be with you on this great Monday morning. Hope everybody is doing wonderful after a great weekend. And this is a great conversation for us to be having. What does it mean to be able to speak freely in America? And the First Amendment is what I want to point us to. First Amendment says what? Congress shall make no law, right, respecting an establishment of religion, prohibiting the free exercise thereof. We love that, right? We should. Or the next clause, very important, abridging the freedom of speech. So what we're talking about here is what is the federal government's role in speech? And the FCC is trying to implement a law that goes back many years, and it's premised on something that our great friend Justice Thomas criticized in 2012. And the idea that the radio waves, the spectrum for broadcast and radio is a limited commodity. That's the rationale the federal government is used and Congress used to impose these requirements on broadcasters. And so what Disney is doing is going through the process that the law and regulation has required for them to get an exemption from this fairness doctrine. And, basically what it means to be a news program is that you are actually, okay, so The View may not fit in here, but you're actually communicating news, okay? And I don't watch The View. The only thing I ever see from The View is when people like you or other people post the crazy things that they say. So I don't know. But I do know this. I know the people on The View have their opinions. There's a spectrum of people on The View. Someone who is supposedly somewhat conservative, so they seem to try to balance the perspectives.
The token.
Where I come down, what's that?
The token, anti-Trump.
Yeah, the token so-called conservative. Yeah, I don't know if Alyssa is conservative or not. I don't listen to her really. But the point is, I don't think that the federal government should be involved in policing any of these programs. That's my opinion. So I think we need. So Disney's teeing this up. Brendan Carr has said things about The View. Disney's making the application, and this is going to tee up a case that's going to the Supreme Court to test the precedent on whether or not the First Amendment allows the federal government to do this fairness doctrine at all. And we've criticized the fairness doctrine a lot over the years. So this is going to be very interesting.
Yeah, and from that, The View aside, and laughing at that being the case study that Disney wants to tee up, do you think that maybe they should have picked a better example and a better plaintiff perhaps than The View?
No, I think this is great. Look, if you want to test something, you want to take something that's going to be getting attention, and The View gets a lot of attention. I think this is a great case. This is going to be a very interesting case. If the FCC says, okay, here you go, here's your exemption, which they give to lots of people. By the way, Gutfeld, which I love, by the way, I like Gutfeld, right, has a exemption. So there are a lot of shows that are kind of like The View, but on our side, so to speak. I think Gutfeld is better than obviously all of them on The View, but it's kind of similar. You got Talking Heads, you got The Five, you got all these different so-called news shows, and these are people just providing their opinion. And if they have a candidate on, because what happened is, the View had Talarico on, the guy who's running for Senate in Texas, which is kind of what triggered some of this. And he, got a lot of time. And there's this idea that if unless it's bona fide news, you're supposed to give equal time to the other side. And so there's this question. Is the View bona fide news? And what is bona fide news? Do we want the government telling us what bona fide news is these days, where we can get our news anywhere we want?
Well, and why should that necessarily be the standard? I mean, I can kind of see, both sides of the coin, that if a show that is massively popular and you have, a lot of these dominant programs that are basically refusing to have the Republican candidates on, but they'll have the Democrat candidates. Is that necessarily fair or is that electioneering? I mean, is ultimately the question. But then as Trump has tried to push, and actually during the time I worked for him, we talked about this all the time, because it was a frustration of his that a lot of not only the candidates like himself, but a lot of his surrogates or his campaign advisors and his staff who were in media, like me, for example, weren't welcome on certain shows and certain networks. And that was a disadvantage, because then you only heard one side of it, right? But at the same time, then the question, as you rightly say, I mean, why should bona fide news, whatever that means, why should that even be a standard when all of these networks are private entities anyways, and shouldn't they be able to determine what their programming is, and why should they have to offer equal time just because more people happen to tune into them? And especially, I mean, and I think what you're saying, Mike, as well, with kind of this antiquated, in 2026, this antiquated idea that the airwaves are scarce and it's a limited supply. I mean, we now have podcasting, we have X that we're live streaming on right now. We have all of these alternative platforms, and cable news actually isn't nearly as popular as it once was. But we do have, but popular aside, we do have all of these other alternatives, that there's no shortage of programs that could offer a spot to conservatives if they wanted to. But is it the government's job to say you have to have equal time for the candidates? Now, in advertising, I think that's different. But actually on the program, should the government be in the business, basically, of producing The View?
Yes, that's a great question, and I think that is the question. Justice Thomas wrote with Justice Ginsburg back in 2012 in FCC versus Fox television stations, so this case, he said, the scarcity rationale fails to distinguish broadcast from cable and represents a deep intrusion into the First Amendment rights of broadcasters. So again, going back, 1913, the broadcasting regime where the government was doling out sections of frequency when we didn't have the technology that obviously that we have today. And now this idea that scarcity can be a rationale, if it ever could be. Like, I don't think it ever could be. I think that was wrong back then. I think it's wrong now. I think the government needs just to get out of the business of regulating speech 100% because, well, that's what the Constitution says. It says shall not abridge the freedom of speech. When it comes to advertising, I tend to have the same idea. Why should the government be able to force people to advertise for certain people? I mean, I know this is a regime that we're, used to, but I think we are being given an opportunity here to have this conversation and think about, what does the Constitution mean? What did the founders intend? When they said Congress shall make no law, bridging the freedom of speech. And I think we apply that here. And I think that people should be able to listen to what they want to listen to. And I think that they should be able to produce the kind of content that they want to produce, as long as it's not, obscenity. Obviously, that does not get First Amendment protection, but that's very limited, very, very limited lanes. I think that we need to let people make their own choices.
Yeah.
Shocker.
Right. And that's actually the conservative and the constitutional position. So what about the question, though, of electioneering? I mean, because it's not like anybody at the FCC is saying, well, if you have someone on to comment on, this perspective of, maybe a news event or something that's outside of elected officials and campaigns, right? Or even an elected official, like, you have to, if you have, the governor of one state, you have to have the governor of all states. Like, that's not part of this. This just relates to candidates for campaigns. And so how do you respond then to the question of, well, isn't this electioneering if the people who just tune into this, or, they're seeing only CNN at the airport or whatever, then they're only going to get to hear from one candidate, and it's actually foreclosing the opportunity to get in front of the same set of voters. But then the follow-up to that, of course, is, well, why does this only apply to airwaves instead of, everybody? Like, for example, if a church wants to invite a candidate to speak, they're not obligated to invite, the Democrat. If a private club wants to have a candidate and host a forum, they're not required to have everybody. So why is this unique to airwaves?
Well, if organizations that are C3s, that get involved have to be neutral, right? They can't get involved in electioneering at all.
Right.
But, certain organizations like churches and private clubs are exempt. No, it's a fair question. I tend to apply the same logic. I just feel like we should just move the government out of our lives as much as possible. Government has a role to play in our lives to protect the innocent and punish, criminals. But when it comes to the marketplace of ideas and speech and governance, technology has given us the ability, and I think we always had the ability, but maybe we thought about it differently 100 years ago, but to choose the kind of information we consume and to place the ideas that we want to hear. And I think people who start up companies, podcasts, whatever, should be able to choose that and not have somebody telling them who they have to have on their program, what kind of content they have to advertise, and those kinds of restrictions. I think we'd be better off as a country if the government were not involved in making those decisions for us.
Yeah, and I agree with you that that the government shouldn't be involved in producing a private show's programming, regardless of whether it's The View, whether it's Fox News, regardless of where it is on the spectrum, because that also would have the effect then of not necessarily having the candidates, just having some either surrogates or commentators, or others, because every show that's produced curates their own content in terms of deciding what they're going to cover on air. I mean, I do the same thing, right? Like with my production team and my producer, Luke, we get together every day and decide, what stories are we going to cover? And I don't want the government coming in and telling me, here's the news that you have to cover. Here's the guests that you have to put on. Now, we are a nonprofit, so, we do as AFR, if we invite, one candidate on, we invite all of them. Now, not everybody decides to participate, and that's their decision. But even in that sense, do you think that for the nonprofit status, that even that is fair?
Not really. But, that's the thing is, if you're going to get a benefit from the government, you're going to have some control that comes along with it. It's a tax policy. If you want the ability to give people recognition for the donation that they give to you, then the government's going to, say, okay, we'll give you this benefit, but in exchange for that, we're going to take this away from you. Because, again, it goes back to the same idea of regulating the airwaves. It's a scarce commodity. We're going to control it, and we're going to decide the terms on which to control it. If you go and seek tax benefit status from the government, there's going to come rules that are going to come along with it. I'm not sure that should be. I mean, shocker, I don't think we should have an income tax system, right? And so a lot of this goes back to the income tax system. The government said, okay, or we, the people, said back in 1913, we're going to allow the government to impose an income tax on us. And now all these little rules and regulations and requirements kind of squeeze out from the income tax code. I don't like that at all. And if we got rid of the income tax code, I think a lot of that behavior would go away and people would be able to make decisions based on their own incentives. And when you talk about the incentive structure, I think, companies that are running for profit, like all these broadcast companies want to make a profit, they're going to be incentivized to have advertisers and choose programs that are of interest to people that people want to watch. I mean, is there left-leaning belief in some of the organizations? Yes. Is there a right-leaning belief in some? Yeah. I mean, is there an imbalance? I don't know. I feel like I can get the information and news I want whenever I want it. So I feel like we're in a good spot. So maybe it's time to kind of just start moving the government out of regulating speech altogether.
Yeah, really well said. Well, we have to take a break here, but Mike Donnelly is going to follow us through the break, and we're going to continue to talk about this. I think it's a really fascinating topic, and, one that, as I said in the introduction, my public comment is ha, ha, ha about The View actually being bona fide news. But really, this does, as we've been discussing, it gets to a much deeper question, which I think can be summed in, should the government be in the business of producing The View? Should it be in the business of producing any show that is on a private network? I don't think that they should. Absolutely not. I mean, regardless of what your status is, I mean, even as a nonprofit, I don't think that the government should be in the business of regulating that. So how do we move the needle back and start kind of rolling back all of these things that came about, in the early 20th century that just really undermined freedom and liberties in the Constitution? We'll talk about that when we come right back.
Weekday mornings at 8 Central, Pastor Jeff Shreve offers real truth for today.
I'm the pastor of First Baptist Church in Texarkana, Texas, and the founder of From His Heart Ministries.
The world around us is rapidly changing, but God and His truth will never change.
I may be the host of the show, but I want God's Word and His truth to be the star of the show.
Join Pastor Jeff Shreve each weekday morning at 8 Central for Real Truth for Today on American Family Radio.
Let's think about what God has done. I would wager that his top news story is still that the free salvation through the blood of Jesus Christ is available to all. I wager that will be the top news story until that salvation is no longer available. You will have made your decision for eternity. He doesn't ask us to do anything he won't, and then he does above what we can possibly do.
Hear Todd Herman on A Disciple's View, weekdays 12 p.m. Central on AFR.
Hi, I'm Doug Chamberlain, host of Family Health Checkup. For over 30 years, Samaritan members have come together to share medical costs and lift each other up in prayer. Now, I'm excited to tell you about Redeem Health Share Ministry, Samaritan's next generation of healthcare sharing. Redeem offers affordable, flexible programs that reflect your values and help you manage medical costs with confidence. Each month, members contribute a share amount to help pay each other's medical bills, and you choose the providers and treatments that are right for your family. It's not insurance, it's a community of believers supporting one another through life's health challenges. So, whether it's a routine visit or a sudden emergency, there's a caring Christian community walking with you every step of the way. Redeem Health Share. It's more than healthcare. It's hope. It's healing. It's faith in action. Call 1-844-REDEEM-0 today. Join the movement. Share joyfully. Live redeemed.
America was founded as a nation under God, but the U.S. Supreme Court has broken our national relationship with God. Many court rulings have contributed, but three stand out. In 1962, the court removed prayer from public schools. In 1963, the court removed Bible reading from public schools. And lastly, in 1980, the court removed the Ten Commandments from America's classrooms. The Supreme Court broke our relationship with God, and any restoration of that relationship must include the Supreme Court. And a vacancy on the Supreme Court could soon be coming. So please support AFA Action's urgent legal work to help President Trump select and the U.S. Senate confirm godly constitutional justices for the Supreme Court. We put thousands of hours of research into potential nominees. We use our networks at the Trump administration and the U.S. Senate to promote the good nominees and oppose the bad ones. AFA Action needs the resources of supporters like you to help maximize our efforts. So please visit afaaction.net to learn more and donate today.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back, and I'm here with my special guest, Mike Donnelly, which, by the way, you can and should be following him on X as well, at Donnelly Speaks, and you can get a lot of great opinions and a little bit of snark over there as well. But we're talking about this issue of the FCC and the government's involvement in private airwaves and producing shows. And one of the things that essentially producing shows by telling the news or the shows themselves, the programs, what candidates they must have on. If they have one, then they have to have the opposing candidate, unless there is some kind of exemption. And so we were talking before the break, Mike, about a lot of this going back to at least for nonprofits and others who are under that requirement that if you invite one, you have to invite all, which AFR is under as a nonprofit. That a lot of this goes back to the exemptions from the tax code, which, in my opinion, asking for an exemption is assuming that the regulation that necessitates the exemption is lawful on face to begin with. And when we're talking about the tax code, when we're talking about government's intrusion into private property, which includes our money, there were so many things that are wrong with how the government currently taxes, especially income tax. And I don't think that organizations like AFR or organizations like churches should even have to qualify for exemptions when the regulation itself is ultimately unfair, and I would say unconstitutional in a number of ways. But the problem initially is that we have the 16th Amendment, which overall should be repealed. So, I mean, that's a lot to get into, but, we've got about 9 minutes. So good luck.
Repealing the 16th Amendment in 9 minutes. I love it. This is great.
Yes.
So what I want to let me just point people to the organization that has a plan called fairtax.org. Fairtax.org. This is an organization I've known about this organization for 30 years. I've been a big supporter of eliminating the income tax because I believe that the income tax is immoral. It is the government. Over time, it has become that way. It was sold as, we're just going to, we need some money for it was pre-World War I, but we need more money to run the government. You can trust us. We're experts. Just give us more so we can do what we want to do, basically. And the people went along with it. 1913, passed the 16th Amendment. Boom, we have an income tax. It'll just be for the rich people. Yeah, right. Now, interestingly, 50%, whatever the numbers are, 50% of taxes are paid for by 30% of the people. Or so, it's skewed. And I love that some people are talking about, let's get rid of taxes on the lowest 50%. And some people think, well, that's not really fair, is it? Because why shouldn't everybody pay taxes? There's this idea that's been baked into our heads that we all have to pay taxes at all. Any way we can eliminate the income tax, in my view, is moving in the right direction to get people to think about eliminating the income tax because that's such an impact on our country. The compliance costs are huge. It shapes behavior. I mean, why do you think so many people have solar panels on their roof of their house? Right? Tax credits. People want to get these tax credits. So government uses the tax code to incentivize certain behaviors. All the electric cars, right? Electric cars. Government was underwriting electric cars out through the tax code, tax credits, right? And the companies produce them. People get tax credits. It's the government putting its thumb on the scale of the marketplace. And it shouldn't do that, but the tax code allows it to do it. So people who want to learn about an alternative should go to Fair Tax. They've got a plan. They replace the income tax with a sales tax, which is kind of what the Constitution envisioned in the first place. The founders envisioned the federal government getting its main revenue from imposts, excise taxes. Yes, tariffs. Okay, yes, that's what the founders envisioned the federal government being funded by. But when you start getting into this idea of churches and nonprofits, I completely agree with you, Jenna. I mean, again, but it's rooted in the tax code. This idea that churches or nonprofits are limited in how they can speak because they get a tax benefit. That comes from the 501c3 code section of the IRS code that gives nonprofits the ability to offer a tax benefit when they get a donation. And that's been abused. If you go back to the Johnson Amendment, some people may remember the conversations over the years about this thing called the Johnson Amendment. that was added to the Internal Revenue Code when Lyndon Johnson, the senator, was facing a tough re-election, and churches were criticizing him. And they probably should have been. Like, I don't know all the details of it, but I mean, churches, pastors, anyone should be allowed to speak freely. They shouldn't be restricted in what they say, how they say it, just because they're getting a tax benefit from the government. I don't know if anybody's ever thought about challenging the Johnson Amendment on First Amendment grounds, but it kind of comes to mind. Maybe we should think about that. ADF, Alliance Defending Freedom, has a great article on their website that talks about this if people want to learn more. But I think as a country, we do need to be having this conversation. We need to move the government out of policing what we say, who can say what, and just let people speak freely.
Yeah, and so well said. And I want to also make a distinction with what you said about the income tax being immoral with, some Christians who may be listening that are saying, well, wait a minute, doesn't the Bible explicitly command followers to pay taxes? And Jesus saying, in Matthew, I think it's Matthew 22, render therefore to Caesar the things that are Caesar's and the things to God the things that are God's. Well, that doesn't mean, and Jesus wasn't saying, let the government steal from you. I mean, there are various types of taxes, and there is an overtaxation, and there can be. And so when we're talking about the biblical view on taxes, it doesn't mean that Christians just have to go along with whatever the tax scheme is that the government invents.
Oh, thank you for giving me the opportunity to clarify my remarks on that. I'm certainly not telling people not to pay taxes or to break the law. I pay my taxes, and I don't like paying them, okay? I object to it. But I also don't mind paying taxes because I do want to fund the government because I think the government does have a legitimate purpose. But I believe that the income tax system as a system is immoral, okay? And not the actual paying of the tax. That is lawful. You got to do it. You got to do it. You're required to do by law. So I'm not telling people to break the law. But the system of it, what it takes from people the one thing that they have that is their own, that I think that is their own, which is their time. And it forces people to use their time and to fund things that they might not otherwise want to fund. Like when you have a national sales tax that is not the income tax, you can choose what you're going to spend your money on, and therefore what will provide revenue to the government, whichever government it is. But income taxation is taxing your time every single day. You know, how many months do we all work until we pay our debt to whatever government is taking income from us, whether it's the state government or the federal government? And isn't that kind of a sort of a form of involuntary servitude where, you know, we're actually working and they're taking the money that we earn to pay for things for our families? So that's what I meant by that. And again, go to fairtax.org to learn more about it.
Yeah. And that is a completely fair position, and it's a biblical position. And this is where, you know, Christians can't just read scripture and say, okay, well, because we're required to pay our taxes and obey the law, then we can't then have these methods and attempts to try to change what the law says in policy. I mean, we do that all the time. I mean, that's part of the reason that we have elections, is that we have people, hopefully in Congress and also, the White House, that will pass legislation and issue executive orders that are conservative in nature. And this all goes back to a legitimate form of government, government legitimacy, and not going outside of what limited powers are derivative of God's own authority that he gave to civil government to establish justice, to do good, promote good and restrain evil. As you mentioned, Mike, I mean, there are so many different programs that the government, takes so much money and then goes and spends on whatever without asking for our consent. I don't want to be paying for, abortions for any individuals. I don't want to be participating with my tax money in, IVF for a homosexual couple, like Trump's executive order would like me to, right? I mean, there are so many things that Christians need to be aware of, but we have to understand how to fight for this. And this is a much bigger conversation. We'll have to have you on back on sometime to talk about this more thoroughly. But I appreciate the overview, and we need to think about this more nuanced, and we also need to think about this as it relates to the government involvement in things like the FCC regulation. I mean, we are so conditioned to say, okay, just because this is the way that it's been in our lifetimes, that's the way it should be. Like people saying, well, if you don't want to, if you don't want to be under government regulation, church, then start paying taxes. Well, no. The question is, why should the government have any standing to come in and tell the church to begin with, regardless of taxes, what they should or shouldn't say? So, Mike Donnelly, we're already out of time, but really appreciate it. Again, follow him at Donnelly Speaks. You can reach me and my team, Jenna at afr.net.